Hi, my name is Ewan McGahey, and in Enterprise Law today we are doing labour rights and workers. Now, this is going to be a very compacted overview of labour law and how it matters to the corporation. Of course, like the classes that we've done on company law or corporate governance, and we're going to do soon on competition law. This could be an entire course, and certainly if you want to go into it more in depth, you can, because I've also got a labour law course up online on YouTube as well. So you're welcome to check that out. But so what we're trying to do is look at labour law and the rights of workers as a stakeholder in enterprise. With the idea of general enterprise law is that you have stakeholders who invest capital, who invest labour, who invest custom, and of course there's also debt capital as well as equity capital. Those are the creditors. So labour is a very important kind of stakeholder. And what we're interested in is not going through every detail of workers' rights, because there's lots, but what we want to do is understand the role of labour as an input and how people take part in the way that enterprises run. So the way that labour is ultimately a financing mechanism for enterprise, and the rights, I beg your pardon, the governance voice that labour has. And then also we're going to talk in summary about the basic rights that people have in their workplaces. So a couple of quotes that I'd like to start off with today are these two from Robert Clark and Abraham Lincoln. So we're going to jump across the pond because people over there often have very interesting things to say, even if labour has historically been very much on the back foot in America. So Robert Clark was the dean of Harvard Law School at one time. He wrote a very important, very good textbook on corporate law in 1986. And he says there that even if your aim is not to understand all of the law's effects on corporate activities, but only to grasp the basic legal constitutional makeup of the modern corporation, you must at the very least also gain a knowledge of labour law. And I think that's really important because it speaks to the fact that quite a lot of corporate law courses don't put labour at the centre of how corporations function, even though it certainly is. Labour is necessary to represent the corporation. People who are on the board of directors are employees of the corporation. Very simply, you don't have corporations without labour, although you can have corporations without capital. What a lot of corporate lawyers seek to exclude worker participation, the discussion of worker participation from corporate governance courses, but that really impoverishes the understanding of how modern corporations really work. And you've got it on no lesser authority of Robert Clark in Corporate Law. We all need a working understanding of labour law in order to understand corporations. And of course, what enterprise law as a study is trying to do is bring these things together to see how enterprises really do function in the world that we live in. Second quote is from Abraham Lincoln, of course, President of the United States, who fought to keep America unified through the Civil War, and whose Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery in the United States. So one of the greatest presidents. And in his first annual message, Lincoln said that labour is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labour and could not have existed if labour had not first existed. Labour is the superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration. And what Lincoln is doing there is reflecting actually the majority view in political economy at the time of value creation coming from labour. So, this is a pretty straightforward expression that of the labour theory of value. And there's lots of debate about that since, but I think it also speaks to the fact that the reason why Lincoln is right that we should value labour more highly than capital is because human freedom is surely the goal of all economic policy, human development, human improvement. And very simply, capital is a group of inanimate objects, or, well, you can have intellectual capital as well. But All of that wealth is generated by the work that people do. And we can get into sort of philosophical, technological discussions about AI. But still, I think, until something very, very dramatic happens, which is not on the horizon, what Lincoln says is still accurate. And it also feeds into the idea that labour have rights at work, and that rights are central to the way that the economy is governed today. Of course, back in 1861, America in particular was still, well, at that time, developing, even in the most basic systems of rights, namely the right to own your own body, that nobody else could own you. And so that was the abolition of slavery. But also Lincoln was at the forefront of thinking about advancing pensions, initially for veterans. And that is the core message here. So, if we fast forward to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, we can see that by a century later, labour rights were coming into the Magna Carta of humanity, as Eleanor Roosevelt put it. So in the Universal Declaration, and this is sort of Jus Cogent's norms of international law, it's codified in the International Covenants of 1966, we see labour rights being central. So everyone under Article 20 has the right to peaceful assembly and association. So that means joining and organising in trade unions. We see the same things reflected in a number of conventions from the International Labour Organization, 87 and 98, Freedom of Association and Collective Bargaining Conventions. And these are instruments that bind everybody who's a member of the ILO, which is every country in the world. Of course, the ILO was set up with the end of the First World War, and all of these principles are codified in the International Covenant of Economic and Social Rights, so Articles 6 to 10. So freedom of association is like one of the main foundation stones of labour rights, the right to join a union and take action. Article 21 says everyone has the right to take part in government of his country. And this is relevant not only when we're talking about politics, but also representation in the economy, directly or through freely chosen representatives. Article 22, everyone as a member of society has a right to social security. So that is protection from unemployment, that is pensions, that is protection if you're disabled, so that you have a fair income to live on. Article 23, everyone has the right to work, which means the duty of government to promote full employment or give a job guarantee, the right to free choice of employment, to just and favourable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. And we see this reflected in other International Labour Organization conventions. Everyone has the right without any discrimination to equal pay for equal work. Everyone has the right to just and favourable remuneration, fair pay. Everyone has the right explicitly to join trade unions for the protection of their interests, so that includes the right to strike. It's actually a case in the International Court of Justice about this very topic at the moment. And Article 24, everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including limitation of working hours, and periodic holidays with pay. So, if you look at the International Constitution, we see the beginnings of, in 1948, an attempt to codify, what are the rights necessary at work for a good life? And these are very high level. What is needed is for details of legislation to bring these down to the ground, bring them into the workplace, and set up the systems of collective bargaining that are necessary to, and voice at work, which are necessary to advance fair pay, periodic holidays with pay, social security, and so forth. But so high-level principles matter because they set the contours. And this matters in domestic law because the courts in the UK have acknowledged that they should attempt to interpret domestic law compatibly with international treaties that we have ratified, like the International Covenant, and therefore indirectly the Universal Declaration, although there isn't a hard enforcement mechanism like there is through the Human Rights Act of 1998. But now, that's what's going on in international law and in human rights in the post-war period. But there was a backlash amongst economists, particularly at the University of Chicago, which was founded by J.D. Rockefeller, the big oil magnate, who said that the University of Chicago was the best investment that he ever made. And so a group of economists, hardline economists like Milton Friedman, Friedrich von Hayek, argue again and again from pretty much the 1950s onwards that all labour rights backfire and then they harm the economy. So Milton Friedman claims in a famous 1953 chapter called The Methodology of Positive Economics that if you have a minimum wage, it inevitably causes unemployment, and it particularly prizes women and minorities out of a job because employers won't want to hire people when the cost of labour is artificially, according to Friedman, set by law above what a market equilibrium price would be. So if you have any minimum wage at all, it creates unemployment, and therefore you should get rid of it. Gary Becker claims in The Economics of Discrimination, his view of economics, that discrimination laws are unnecessary because employers are rational, so it doesn't make sense to discriminate because it'll harm the bottom line. So you don't really need any civil rights legislation, any equality laws at all. They should all be scrapped. Richard Posner, in Economic Analysis of the Law, argues that unions are like a price-fixing cartel. And in the same way as the minimum wage raises the cost of labour, so do unions. And that means that unemployment is inevitably created. So we should all but get rid of union rights. Fair dismissal rights at work, argues Richard Epstein, deter employers from hiring. So if you raise the cost, so the logic goes, of firing people, then that means that employers are less willing to hire. This is in 1984. And Friedman argues that the government's attempt to create full employment through fiscal and monetary policy, ensuring that everybody has a job, will inevitably cause runaway inflation because he claims that there is a so-called natural rate of unemployment. And therefore, when the government tries to spend more money through fiscal policy, or it lowers interest rates using monetary policy to boost the economy and try to boost jobs, if it's going anywhere below the so-called natural rate, that's just going to lead to more inflation. The problem with all of these theories is that they are completely evidence-free. So nothing that I've listed so far had a shred of credible evidence behind it. The laws that they were talking about actually did lead to the results that were claimed. And there is a vast body of literature on this, and in 2025 we are obviously in a better position to assess the reality, the evidence, the empirical evidence than Milton Friedman was in 1953. But nevertheless, the extent to which this line of economic thought gets it wrong is absolutely staggering. So one of the best studies, there could be many, we could take a long time going through it, but we don't need to. One of the best studies is from Zoe Adams, Simon Deacon, Colin Fenwick, many others, in 2019 in the International Labour Review, in a paper called The Economic Significance of Laws Relating to Employment Protection and Different Forms of Employment. And this looks at labour laws in 40 different indicators through 117 countries around the world. And it finds that actually when there's improvement of labour rights pretty much across the board, this improves labour share of income. So obviously it's good for equality. It also reduces unemployment. It increases the rate of employment, has small but significant effects on productivity, and there's a body of work as well that show that labour laws create innovation by creating security. So fortunately, the world has not listened to the evidence-free economic theory that came from the Chicago School, but still gets pushed and is still incredibly influential in a lot of policy circles. The same kinds of theories are regularly seen in financial journalism. I read an article in the Financial Times this morning from a journalist very well respected called Martin Wolf that's essentially repeating the line from authors like these and Friedrich von Hayek that a new employment rights bill is going to harm the economy, and it's simply not true. The evidence is quite the reverse. If you don't have labour laws, then you are likely to have more employment. Yes, minimum wages do in fact work. Of course, if you put a minimum wage up to £50, £100 an hour, then that's going to have negative impacts. But when it's within a reasonable range, what minimum wage laws do is they make sure that capital's share of income is not excessive, more is returned to workers, and because of greater aggregate demand being generated by people at the lower end of the income spectrum having more money, and because of the effects on productivity, you have multiplier effect, and the economy does well. Same thing with collective bargaining, getting fair pay for everyone, and so it's very, very simply a choice about whether you want to live in a poorer, more unequal country where capital is in control, or you want to do recognizing what Abraham Lincoln once said, is have a richer, more equal country where Labour have more rights. And the good news is that when we look across the world, this is Simon Deacon paper in 2024, using the same data from the last paper that I mentioned in 2019, 117 countries around the world. When we look at the trend in labour rights, we can very, very clearly see that from 1970 onwards, there's been a steady increase in the strength of labour protection. And that's including protection against discrimination for different kinds of employment contracts, making sure that people have adequate working time, rights to time off work, not working excessive hours, rights to collective bargaining and representation in the company, and votes for boards of directors, and rights to job security. So across the board, there has been a trend amongst all countries around the world, but particularly democracies, to better labour standards. So what we're going to look at in outline are these four topics for the UK, and by extension, I mean, we often see the same things going on around Europe. So first we're going to look at the structure of management, employment and trade unions and their interrelationship. And indeed, these are the sort of three key actors in labour law. So labour law is mainly about the relationship between management, workers and unions. Secondly, we're going to look at the minimum floor of rights that is created through law, through which nobody should be able to fall through. Through which nobody should be able to fall, or nobody should be able to fall through. And thirdly, we're going to look at rights to voice at work, participation, how you get fair standards beyond the minimum, and fourthly, job security. And I suppose it's just worth saying here as well that all systems of labour law since Sidney and Beatrice Webb, authors of Industrial Democracy, founders of the London School of Economics, have tried to do what they argued for, which is that labour law should set a floor of rights to get minimum standards, but then there should be means for voice at work, chiefly collective bargaining and representation on boards of directors to make sure that workers have fair standards beyond the minimum. Okay, so that's what we're going to cover.